Last year, Republicans in Arizona lined up behind a bill that would have punished teachers and opened them up to lawsuits. The idea was this: if a student was, for example, scared to tell his or her family that they were gay or transgender or thinking about those issues, and the student decided instead to talk with their teacher about it, well, this Arizona law would create an affirmative legal obligation for the teacher, forcing the teacher to call the student's parent and tell. And if the teacher didn't do it, Arizona Republicans said that teacher should lose his or her license, and it should be okay for the teacher to be sued as an individual. During that same session, Republicans also pushed legislation that would have banned books like Maya Angelou's book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, or George Orwell's 1984, or F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. They'd all be banned. Critics say that because of the way that bill was originally crafted, it would have also made it illegal to teach anything at all about homosexuality. You could not say that it exists. What those two bills had in common is that to create those bills, Republicans in Arizona consulted with the same far-right interest group, a group called Family Watch International. It's based in Arizona, but while that group is based in Arizona, they really only dabble in this stuff in the United States. Where they really do most of their work is overseas. This is a right-wing anti-gay group in America, in Arizona, that for years has backed anti-gay legislation in countries like Nigeria, where same-sex relationships are punishable by death, depending on what part of the country you're in. Along the way, this Arizona group has also forged close ties with the virulently anti-gay activists who were enthusiastic supporters in Parliament of Uganda's previous Kill the Gays bill. In March of this year, just weeks ago, this Arizona group was one of the key organizers of a conference in Uganda that hosted lawmakers, hosted elected officials from more than a dozen countries in Africa. At this conference, again, organized by an Arizona conservative group, lawmakers from more than a dozen countries gathered in Uganda and promised that in their home countries, they would push legislation against the sin of homosexuality. Here's the head of Family Watch International meeting with her longtime friend, the First Lady of Uganda, at that conference. The First Lady said that during that most recent meeting, they discussed, in her words, concern about the imposition of harmful practices like homosexuality. American activists taking that message abroad. Well, now Family Watch International's efforts appear to be paying off. Just a few weeks ago, the parliament in Uganda passed what amounts to a new Kill the Gays bill that would impose the death penalty for certain offenses. It calls for life in prison for anybody who has gay sex. It makes it illegal to advocate for the rights of LGBTQ people. Advocacy would carry up to 20 years in prison as its penalty. The White House has already come out hard against this legislation.
Before I turn it over to my NSC colleague here, I want to say one thing at the top. We have grave concerns with the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, AHA, by the Parliament of Uganda yesterday, and increasing violence targeting LGBTQI+ persons. The bill is one of the most extreme anti-LGBTQI+ laws in the world. Human rights are universal. No one should be attacked, imprisoned, or killed simply because of who they are or whom they love.
Strong criticism from the White House by the Biden administration for this proposed new Kill the Gays law in Uganda. The status of it right now is that it's been sent back to the parliament in Uganda for, quote, strengthening. Apparently, the president of Uganda wanted a provision added regarding so-called conversion therapy to cure people of being gay. But as far as we know, this thing could be reintroduced as soon as tomorrow. Our next guest, who's joining us live from Uganda, is one of the most accomplished, most respected LGBTQ rights activists in that whole part of the world. He told us today that the parliament in his country has issued notice that it's going to reconsider this bill during tomorrow's session. He says members of parliament have confirmed that tomorrow may in fact be the day. What that means for us here in this country is that, yes, the Biden administration has already spoken out about this bill, but if they are going to turn up the heat on this, if they are really going to try to use their influence to stop this, the time is now. The time is right now, as in tonight. Joining us now from Uganda's capital city of Kampala is Frank Mugisha. He's the executive director of Sexual Minorities Uganda. Mr. Mugisha, I really appreciate you being here. I know it's a dangerous time for you to be speaking out, and I also know that it's the middle of the night where you are. I really appreciate you being here, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for amplifying our voice now and back then when the Kill the Gays bill was just introduced. We appreciate that, and we need that for our voices to be amplified, not only here in Uganda, but also in other parts of Africa where this kind of legislation is being introduced. Thank you for having me.
Of course. As you mentioned, we covered the initial iteration of this bill in 2009 when it went through a long process when it was eventually shelved. Can you tell us about the difference? Is this essentially a continuation of that same idea? Is this worse in some ways? Is it similar legislation?
This legislation is very, very draconian and extreme. This legislation, in my words, and I've said it many times, it is here to erase the entire existence of an LGBTQ person in Uganda, but also it radicalizes Ugandans into hatred of the LGBTQ community, and we're already seeing that happening. This could lead to mob justice. This could lead to people getting disowned by their own families because it compels every person to report any person who is known as an LGBTQ person to the authorities. So this bill is more extreme than the one that was introduced in 2009.
Compelling other citizens to report fellow citizens, fellow Ugandans who they believe to be gay. Tell me, we have seen some coverage in the United States, including, I think, some important reporting in the New York Times about LGBTQ Ugandans fleeing the country, going to Kenya and going to other places, basically trying to avoid the kind of mob justice, the kind of vigilante violence that you're describing. What do you think, if this passes, what do you think this law would mean for people who are out, for people who are activists like yourself?
If this law is passed, we will definitely see many people get arrested. We will see many LGBTQ persons leave the country. So many of the LGBT community members are already fleeing the country. They're trying to go to neighboring Kenya, which is not safe as well. But they feel they would be safer in Kenya than be in prison in Uganda. And we're already seeing Ugandans, like I said, radicalized, hating on LGBTQ persons. We're seeing violence. We're seeing many cases of violence, social exclusion, people getting beaten. So we're seeing that increase. If this bill is passed or signed by the president, we'll definitely see many of the LGBT community members leave the country. We'll see many people get arrested. People like myself who are outspoken, I could end up getting arrested. And many of my colleagues who are outspoken as well could end up being in prison.
Mr. Mugisha, I just have to ask you, if it made a difference for the Obama administration, for the U.S. government to speak out against this proposed legislation when we saw an earlier iteration of this years ago, and in your opinion, would it make a major difference if the Biden administration, if American politicians of all stripes took a firmer stand on this, took a louder stand on this, and put pressure on your country's government to not do it? Would it make a difference if America stood up?
It would make a very big difference if Americans spoke directly to our Ugandan authorities and told them how dangerous this legislation is for the LGBT community here, and how this legislation is going to make the LGBT community unsafe living here in Uganda. And now this legislation is a gross violation of human rights of LGBTQ persons. Yes, it would make a very big difference.
Frank Mugisha, the executive director of Sexual Minorities Uganda, taking a big risk to talk to us live tonight from Kampala. Sir, good luck in your work. Thank you, and be safe.
Thank you so much.